My God, I know this place.
We dig our own graves. For those of us privileged enough to be born with bespoke promises of freedom, not born into slavery and oppression, abject poverty, or one of the countless war-torn regions of the globe, we take for granted how our choices in life play heavily into the futures that we create for ourselves. The scary thing is, there's no way of knowing what consequences our choices will really have until it's already too late. They say when a butterfly beats its wing, it may cause a devastating hurricane halfway across the world. 106 years ago, when the Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, his handful of bullets sparked a war that killed millions. And in 2007, when an Illinois-based illustrator named Doug Walker decided to grab a camera and film a goofy review of the Transformers movie, he probably had no idea he was putting all the pieces in place to trap himself in his own personal hell.
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to.
Like I said, we dig our own graves. What you are about to witness is not a comprehensive history of Doug Walker or the Nostalgia Critic, as many of those exist already. Quentin Review's rumination on and pastiche of To Boldly Flee, Lady Emily's analysis and dissection of Demo Reel, Ralph the Movie Maker's hilarious documentary on Pop Quiz Hotshots, Dan Olson of Folding Ideas' thorough thematic breakdown of Nostalgia Critic's The Wall. This video essay owes a debt to these creators who have previously delved into Doug Walker's filmography. Every one of those videos is worth your time, especially if you have a need for further context. Like some kind of primordial internet demon that requires the occasional blood sacrifice to survive, Doug Walker has been around for a long time, at least by internet standards. We've seen a lot of paradigm shifts in online content and the way we engage with media during this time, but Doug, well, he's more or less remained the same. He's the Nostalgia Critic. He remembers it because we don't have to. But in this video, I want to talk about one moment in the Doug Walker story that functions as kind of a point of no return for him. The moment when Doug Walker ceased to be, and his alter ego, the Nostalgia Critic, assumed full control. I'm talking about The Review Must Go On, a 32-minute video released on January 22nd, 2013. Can it be called good by any reasonable standard? No. But is it the best thing that Doug Walker ever made? Yeah, because frankly, The Review Must Go On is a chilling short horror film about regrets, identity, free will, purgatory, and the unsettling truth that oftentimes our worst enemies can come from within. The real question is whether Doug Walker himself actually knows this. As any good film theorist knows, it can enrich the experience of analyzing a movie if you know the content of its creation. So, in case you're not up to speed on the history of the Nostalgia Critic, allow me to remember it so, well, you know the rest. Prior to The Review Must Go On, Doug had been playing the Nostalgia Critic for 5 solid years when he decided that he wanted to retire the character and move on to bigger and better projects. We can't really know what was going on inside of Doug's head at the time, but the most likely interpretation is a mix of creative stagnation, burnout, and the looming fear that new copyright legislation would make the critic's style of content unviable. Doug gave the critic a send-off in the only way he knew how, with a Snyder Cut-length cringe fest known as To Boldly Flee, as well as a review of James Gunn's live-action Scooby-Doo movie that featured an alarmingly uncomfortable rant about what it meant to be the Nostalgia Critic.
Is this it? Is this really life? No, this isn't life. This isn't anything even representing life. But it's life for me. It's pretty pathetic, but it's all I got. I know what you're saying. Wow, that's pretty sad. Well, yeah, it is fucking sad. I don't get to go out and hang with friends. I don't even have any friends. I have nobody to contribute anything to. I have nobody to talk to or bounce things off of. Say, hey, what'd you think of that? I'll tell you what I think of that. No, it's just me bitching and moaning like I always do. And some would say, well, that's a pretty sad existence. Oh, yeah, it is a pretty sad existence. Just say you're like a fucking down. I mean, for God's sake, I've never done anything. I've never done anything something to make someone's life better, or...
On August 14th, 2012, Doug had literally written the character of the Nostalgia Critic out of existence. Then, he proceeded to create his first original series, Demo Reel, co-starring actors Malcolm Ray and Rachel Teets. The show was a largely goofy, stupid, and quintessentially Doug story about an inept production crew trying to both remake and mock popular movies in a way that seems eerily similar to his later and equally terrible Nostalgia Critic sketches. However, in the last few episodes of the show, Doug shifted gears and attempted pathos. The main character, Donnie Dupree, of course played by Doug himself, reveals the tragic backstory of his family's abuse at the hands of the film industry, and how it affects him and his behavior even as an adult. His tendency to mock movies is revealed as an unhealthy coping mechanism that's holding him back from finding true happiness and creative fulfillment. The show's entire thesis ultimately boils down to the fact that tearing down art isn't nearly as valuable or fulfilling as making it. Granted, this is all delivered in a pretty ham-handed and inept fashion because Doug is, in the kindest of terms, a hack, but god damn it, he was a hack who was trying. Demo Reel was raw and vulnerable in the way that the shticky dickhead Nostalgia Critic could never have been. It was a clear commentary on his regrets with the critic, how he'd grown to disagree with what the character and the format had come to represent. This was Doug unshackling himself from the past and preparing to take the biggest step of his life. No longer just reviewing art, but making it himself. And everyone hated it. Most people outside of Doug's fanbase already found his content painful to watch, but Demo Reel was equally reviled, even by Doug's biggest supporters. It was punished just for existing, with historically low view counts and the kind of comments that would drive a man to drink. Sure, the show wasn't good in terms of its technical quality or execution, but it seemed to be the purest motivation Doug had ever brought to an artistic project, and he was essentially getting punched in the face by his most diehard fans for it. From what I've heard, Demo Reel's utter failure put a financial drain on Channel Awesome as a whole, and the company's CEO, known sack of shit Mike McCod, who actually owns the rights to the Nostalgia Critic as a whole, essentially twisted Doug's arm into bringing back a character that Doug had done everything possible to escape. Doug needed to revive the character that he'd literally, canonically wiped out from even his own fictional reality, and the way that he decided to do that was, the review must go on. To date, the upload has almost 500,000 views, and according to its like-dislike ratio and parade of fawning comments, it was met with near-universal acclaim from Doug's fanbase. It has the enigmatic and, in hindsight, almost eerie description of, "Is the Nostalgia Critic back?" Almost like the restless soul of a long-dead man, still lingering in a place he just has no business being no more. So let's talk about that. The first thing we see in The Review Must Go On is Donnie Dupree's reality starting to collapse around him. Shot in a strangely quiet and eerie black and white, what starts off as a normal episode of Demo Reel slowly takes a turn for the Lynchian. Little things stop adding up, like Donnie's coffee suddenly turning into water when he's not looking. Characters around him start making odd references to the Nostalgia Critic, a character that Donnie Dupree has no reason to even know about. And worst of all, people are starting to disappear, from the room, from the world, and even from other characters' memories. Only Donnie notices, and it's starting to drive him to madness. This whole segment has the slow, deliberate pacing of a horror movie. The audience has just enough information to put together what's going on, but the answers aren't spoon-fed to them either. Donnie is a character that Doug has spent 6 episodes trying to endear us to, regardless of whether or not he succeeded. The season finale had even tried to imbue him with genuine human feelings, struggles, and pathos. Layers, goddammit! Layers! We were meant to like Donnie Dupree, to really root for this guy. And now, we're watching his life get erased, piece by piece. As all the people in Donnie's life continue to fade away, he starts to become paranoid. He refuses to let people leave his line of sight, fearing that if he does, they might disappear too. It's an exercise in existential terror, and it continues to worsen until Donnie is alone in the cavernous white void of an ugly and overpriced Illinois studio space. He wanders through the halls, hoping to see someone, anyone, who can provide him some comfort or answers in this inexplicable Ito-esque nightmare. Eventually, he encounters something in the hallway, something that apparently shocks him and fills him with dread. And just before we get to see what it is, we cut to Doug himself in full color, sitting at his computer and trying in vain to finish the scene from demo reel we were just a part of. I'm about to attempt a frightening and next to impossible thing. I'm going to read Doug Walker's mind. If I had to guess what intentions Doug was bringing to the project when he wrote The Review Must Go On, he was probably hoping for something like adaptation. The visionary screenwriter Charlie Kaufman's movie about, well, being Charlie Kaufman, a neurotic creator trying desperately to figure out his life and his art as the two continually seem to bleed into each other. It's the kind of meta, self-referential content that Doug clearly thinks is extremely deep and meaningful. See, for example, the painful end of To Boldly Flee, where Doug and his creation Nostalgia Critic have a hopelessly indulgent conversation about his existence. However, the approach kind of works here, for the same reason adaptation works. Doug is allowing himself to be emotionally vulnerable. We're getting this from the perspective of writer-actor Doug Walker, rather than from the perspective of the Nostalgia Critic, a fictional character with no consistent or meaningful interior life. The central thematic question of The Review Must Go On is, should Doug bring back the critic, and why? A question that rings with a disturbing kind of inevitability, knowing that he never really had a choice. The short is a peek into the rationalizations Doug is making for a decision that was already made for him. But honestly, while Doug's intentions were probably more in line with adaptation, I don't think it's the best comparison for The Review Must Go On. That dubious honor goes to the 1997 psychological horror anime movie Perfect Blue, directed by the legendary and sadly no longer with us, Satoshi Kon. For those who haven't seen this disturbing animated classic, and believe me, you really should, it's the story of Mima, a Japanese pop idol who, much like our dear friend Doug, decides she wants a career change. She's sick of being gawked at by rabid fans and seen as only a shallow entertainer, so she leaves her idol group and takes a crack at becoming a serious actor in a serialized drama. But even though she wants to leave her past behind, her past doesn't feel quite the same way. People in Mima's orbit start dying horribly, her reality begins to fall apart, and she's stalked by hallucination of her old idol self, constantly chastising her for the life she gave up, and threatening to end the life she has now. The parallels to what's happening to Doug in The Review Must Go On are certainly striking. After watching a pirated copy of The Odd Life of Timothy Green, something awakens inside of Doug, and chillingly, something awakens outside of him too. As Doug goes back and forth on whether or not to bring the critic back, he's literally stalked by him, appearing on screens, mirrors, and even darting around corners, always slightly too fast to catch. There's sinister music cues, disconcertingly framed shots that feel oddly uncanny, and a surprisingly subdued performance from Doug himself, all of which genuinely sells the vibe of menace and dread. After you know the story of what happened in real life leading to this video's creation, it becomes almost heartbreaking to watch. Just like Perfect Blue, we're seeing a man who wanted to move on, being haunted by an avatar of his past. It's him, but the way he used to be. It's the manifestation of choices he regrets making, but can't take back. The Nostalgia Critic remembers, so you don't have to, but Doug has to. Naturally, the really good bits are punctuated by the same kind of obnoxious, screechy rants we've come to expect from Doug, as well as some shoehorned cameos, though there is admittedly one pretty funny exchange between Doug and Linkara. And to its credit, the review must go on is defined by silences, more than sound. There's a palpable animosity between Doug and the critic whenever he appears, going from apprehension and fear to what seems like genuine loathing as the video goes on. Each person Doug calls throughout the video, with the exception of Brad, cause fuck that guy, am I right? Represents a different side of the debate raging in Doug's mind. A debate that, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't even matter because the choice had already been made. But it's that exact subtext that makes conversations like this even more tragic.
It was weird. I felt the exact same way I did when I first started. I mean, the excitement, the fresh ideas. I'm wondering if I made the right choice.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm the guy who can answer that for you. Really, it boils down to you.
Yeah. But I made a choice, and it just felt like it was the right time to go.
Your fans didn't seem to think so.
Oh, did they notice? The ass number of emails asking the critic to come back didn't seem to tip me off.
I can't just do it for the fans, though. I gotta do it because I want to do it.
And that right there is the central issue. Does Doug really want this? Or does he just need to believe he wants this so he can live with the reality of his situation? In a conversation with Lindsay Ellis later in the video, who I'm pretty sure still has stress dreams about this, he's further encouraged to leave the critic dead and buried so he can continue to pursue his own personal projects. Projects he actually cares about. He's repeatedly told, "It's your choice," again and again and again by different people throughout the video. But by this point, we already know there are no choices. Much like the family in Ari Aster's Hereditary, all he's got here is the illusion of choice. His future was in the hands of the person who owned his entire life's work, and he realized that way too late to do anything about it. It's been said by many people, including a number of whistleblowers from the Not-So-Awesome document, which we'll touch on later, that Doug has never liked being part of the business side of things. That's why he brought people like Mike McCaud into the equation, who now, like the Swackhammer to Doug's beloved Looney Tunes, has enslaved his ass, and intends to keep the puppet dancing for profit until the strings snap and the wood rots. The only moron really gunning for the Nostalgia Critic to return to the mountain is the Nostalgia Critic himself. He's presented like some kind of sneering, power-hungry monster. The Green Goblin to Doug's Norman Osborn. The Red Dragon to Doug's Francis Dollarhide. The demon that wants to crawl in and take over again. Every conversation Doug has with this iteration of the critic feels sinister, like it's the train of thought of someone talking themselves into getting back together with an abusive ex, or an addict telling themselves that using one last time wouldn't do them any harm.
You are the buried remains of some nostalgia that I have left behind.
Oh, isn't that cute? You're nostalgic for the Nostalgia Critic.
I made a choice. I said I'm not going back, and I'm gonna do exactly that.
Why? What's stopping you?
What am I supposed to go back to anyway? Quoting memes and running jokes?
It isn't always about memes and running jokes. It's about that passion for film and that love of making people laugh. And I know you still got a hunger for both.
This is no triumphant return. It's closer to a waking nightmare. Doug tries to push the critic away, becoming increasingly exasperated as his past threatens to consume his future. It becomes deeply and tragically apparent that Doug wanted to get out. He wanted to do his own thing, to make real and vulnerable art that reaches people, but he simply can't. The critic, the sum of every shitty creative and business choice he ever made, is not going to let him. In one particularly unsettling scene filmed in Doug's bathroom, the critic essentially manipulates him into believing demo reel was only ever an extension of the Nostalgia Critic.
Who's to say you can't do your other ideas?
I'm done talking to you. The only one you'd have to give up is demo reel. And we already know what that was this whole time. What Donnie was this whole time. You were even starting to write it.
This scene is where it all comes together. The cinematic language all but paints the Nostalgia Critic as being akin to the devil himself. The music, the framing, the motherfucking Kubrick stare? Yeah, even Doug knows about the Kubrick stare. It can't be an accident. Eventually, the critic corners Doug into a quiet, unenthusiastic yes, allowing him to manifest in the real world like an infinitely less lovable Beetlejuice. And much like Beetlejuice, Doug is forced to make an unholy bargain. It sounds like a business meeting, but in reality, it's signing a death warrant. The critic puts out a hit on Donnie Dupree, and when the deed is done, Doug's ascension to the eternal Nostalgia Critic will finally be complete. Doug returns to his laptop and writes the ending of Demo Reel. Doug and the critic speak to Donnie directly, telling him through the mouths of people he thought were his friends that his life wasn't real. His trauma wasn't real. Nothing he's ever done has really meant anything to anyone. He's just another face of the Nostalgia Critic. One last plot hole that needs closing. He's forced to accept that he needs to leave his world and be the critic again. His friends accept the fate of non-existence with bittersweet smiles. Donnie becomes the critic, and the most real vulnerable piece of art that Douglas Darian Walker has ever made is wiped from the canon. The videos are still there, but even within their own text, they are non-events. They never happened. The Review Must Go On ends with the Nostalgia Critic suiting up, sitting in front of a camera, and saying,
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic, and I'm back to remember it so you don't have to.
The music would have you believe that this moment is some kind of victory, and the Nostalgia Critic's fans certainly felt that way, but taken as the conclusion to The Review Must Go On, as a project, as a film, this is no happy ending. This more so resembles Payman's coronation at the end of Hereditary. The sacrifices were made, the vessel was corrected, and to the king went the spoils. Hail, critic. Hail.
I think one of the reasons it works so well is that the first half of this is really just creating this unbelievably uncomfortable, disturbing feeling of dread.
In Donnie Dupree's final moments, Doug makes him a promise. He says, "Everyone you criticize from this point on has a face. In every way, they are just like you. They work hard, they feel pain, they laugh, they cry, and when you mock them, you also mock yourself. You can still criticize all you want, but deep down inside, you'll always know what it's like to be on the other side. And never truly forget." This could have been the starting point for a more empathetic and nuanced take on the Nostalgia Critic, a better version of the character, more appreciative of the trials and tribulations of being a creator on the receiving end of criticism for something that actually mattered to them, because Doug knows how that feels now. But as anyone who has seen a Nostalgia Critic video past the return could tell you, that didn't happen. The world and the internet have continued to change, but Doug, well, he stayed more or less the same. Donnie had to be convinced that Demo Reel was a prison, a purgatory, but it wasn't. It was the closest thing to freedom from the Nostalgia Critic brand that Doug had ever gotten, and it's gone, because, like the Nostalgia Critic, the internet remembers it. If he ever tries to do something different again, to branch out, to be ambitious, to be vulnerable, everyone's just going to say, "Oh, God, not another Demo Reel." And honestly, maybe they're not even wrong. Because Doug's biggest problem has always been that his ambition goes far beyond his talent, skill, and bravery, and he's not a sincere enough man to ever close that gap. The Review Must Go On is such a bleak, haunting experience because on some level, it's Doug acknowledging that. He's admitting his defeat and letting the critic take him. It's Mima in Perfect Blue staring into the rearview mirror, not knowing which her is staring back. It's a short horror film where the villain wins and gets everything he wants.
Even something that's regarded as terrible or forgettable can still inspire something creative.
As almost everyone watching this probably knows, in 2018, a number of active and former contributors to Doug's parent company, Channel Awesome, released the Not So Awesome document. It detailed abuse, mistreatment, and mismanagement from the upper rungs of the organization, including, of course, Doug Walker himself. While nobody accuses Doug of directly doing anything harmful to them, you'd be ignorant to deny that Doug's negligence and cowardice hurt a lot of people who once called him a coworker and even a friend. He abused people's trust, and through his actions and inaction, led to misery and heartache for many. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for almost everyone on the site, leading to a mass exodus of contributors, many of which are better off now, having grown artistically and branched off to do their own thing. But not Doug. Because he wasn't devoted enough to work on himself and close the gap. Because he wasn't brave enough to be sincere again after baring his soul and seeing it spat on. He's stuck right where he is. Anyone who's seen his recent reviews or the infamous video on the wall can tell you that the critic is meaner, pettier, and more oafish of a character than ever. All that talk about empathy was just that. Talk. In the end, he couldn't hold true to putting a face on the creators he talks about, and he couldn't even respect the creators he was working with enough to give them the treatment that they deserved. It's been nearly a decade since Doug decided he didn't like this character anymore, and that he wanted to try something new. It's been nearly a decade since that attempt went down in flames, and he's been stuck playing a character he despises for fans he resents ever since. Like all of us, he did dig his own grave. And after the review must go on, it can be said that that grave was well and truly dug. But he's not Doug Walker. He's the Nostalgia Critic. He remembers it, so you don't have to. And we all know how he feels about that.
I'll tell you who that fuck shit is! He's a